Fix weak memory. Naturally. You walked into the kitchen for a reason. You are standing there right now, and you cannot remember what that reason was. You met someone last week, nice person, good conversation, and today, when you tried to introduce them to your neighbor, their name was simply gone. Not fuzzy, gone. Like it was never there. If this has happened to you in the last month, I want you to know something before we go any further. You are not broken. Your brain is not failing you. In most cases, what you just experienced is not the beginning of something scary. It is the result of a handful of everyday habits that are quietly starving your memory, and every single one of them can be fixed. Not with a pill, not with an expensive supplement, with small, natural changes that you can start today. My name is Coco, and this channel exists for one reason: to help people over 60 stay sharp, stay independent, and stay confident in their own minds for as long as possible. If that sounds like something you want, stay with me for the next 25 minutes, and by the end, you are going to have a real plan, not just information. Let's get into it. The line between normal and pay attention. Before we fix anything, we need to draw a line, because there are two very different things happening when people say, "My memory is getting bad," and mixing them up causes a lot of unnecessary fear. On one side, you have what doctors call normal age-related forgetfulness. You forget where you put your glasses. You walk into a room and forget why. You take a little longer to recall a word that used to come instantly. This is frustrating, but it is not dangerous. It happens because your brain, after 60, 70, 80 years of use, has more information stored, and it takes a fraction of a second longer to search through all of it. Think of it like a filing cabinet that has been used for decades. The files are all still there. It just takes a little longer to pull the right one out. On the other side, you have patterns that genuinely deserve a conversation with a doctor. Getting lost on a route you have driven 100 times. Forgetting the names of your own children, not just acquaintances. Repeating the exact same question 5 times in 1 hour with no memory of asking it before. Struggling to follow a simple recipe you have made your whole life. Personality changes alongside the memory changes, like sudden suspicion or apathy that was not there before. I am not a doctor, and I am not here to diagnose anyone watching this video. But I want you to have this line in your head, because most of what we are going to talk about today lives firmly on the normal, frustrating, fixable side of that line. If what you are noticing feels closer to the second category, please do not wait. Bring it to your physician. Early evaluation matters, and it opens doors to help that get harder to access the longer you wait. Let me give you one more example, because I think it helps to hear how this actually shows up in real life. A man named Richard wrote to me after one of my earlier videos. He was 78, sharp as anything his whole life, worked as an accountant for 40 years. He told me he had started forgetting appointments, and it terrified him because his father had developed dementia in his 80s. When we talked it through, it turned out Richard had stopped using the day planner he had relied on for decades after his wife encouraged him to just remember things naturally instead. He wasn't losing his memory. He had removed the external tool that had been supporting it for 40 years and then blamed his brain for the result. Once he picked the planner back up, his memory problem disappeared within a week. I tell you that story because sometimes the fear is bigger than the actual problem, and sometimes the fix really is that simple. For everyone else, and that is the vast majority of people watching this, let's talk about why your memory feels foggy and what is actually causing it. The sleep connection. Nobody explains properly here is something that surprises almost everyone I talk to. Your memory is not really made while you are awake. It is made while you are asleep. During the day, your brain is like a busy office, collecting notes, conversations, and experiences on sticky notes scattered across every desk. At night, while you sleep, a process happens in the deep stages of sleep where your brain actually files those sticky notes into permanent folders. This is called memory consolidation. Short, deep sleep, and those sticky notes just get thrown in the trash before they were ever filed. Here is the part that matters specifically for people over 60. As we age, the amount of deep, slow-wave sleep we get each night naturally declines. It is not your imagination. It is not laziness, it is biology. But here is what makes it worse, and this is where the fixable part comes in. A lot of people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s develop habits that shrink deep sleep even further than biology already does. Let me give you an example. I spoke with a woman, I'll just call her Diane, who told me she watches the evening news at 10, then falls asleep in her recliner with the television still on until 2 or 3 in the morning, then moves to her bed. She was convinced her memory was declining because of her age. When we looked closer, her actual problem was that she was getting maybe 90 minutes of real deep sleep a night, broken into pieces, with a television flickering the entire time. That is not an aging brain problem. That is a sleep architecture problem. So here is my honest thought on this. Before anyone over 60 assumes their forgetfulness is a memory problem, I want them to ask themselves one simple question first. When was the last time I actually slept 7 hours in a dark, quiet room without waking up more than once? If the answer is, I honestly don't know, that is where we start. 3 natural fixes here, and none of them cost money. First, get morning sunlight on your face within 30 minutes of waking, even for 10 minutes on a porch or by a window. This resets your internal clock and makes deep sleep that night more likely. Second, cut caffeine off by early afternoon, not because caffeine is evil, but because it has a longer half-life in older bodies than people realize, and it can quietly sit in your system into the evening. Third, and this one is uncomfortable for a lot of people, turn the television off before bed instead of using it to fall asleep. The light and sound fragment the exact deep sleep stage your memory depends on. There is one more piece of this that almost nobody talks about, and I think it deserves a mention. Alcohol in the evening. A lot of people in their 60s and 70s have 1 or 2 drinks at dinner as a lifelong habit, and I am not here to tell anyone to give that up entirely. But I do want you to understand what it does mechanically. Alcohol helps you fall asleep faster, which tricks people into thinking it improves sleep. What it actually does is suppress the deep restorative stages of sleep in the first half of the night and then produce more fragmented, lighter sleep in the second half, right around the hours when memory consolidation is most active. If you already suspect your sleep is part of the problem, an honest experiment worth trying is simply moving that evening drink earlier, well before dinner, or skipping it for a week and watching what happens to how you feel the next morning, the blood sugar roller coaster. Now let's talk about something almost nobody connects to memory, and that is what happens on your plate at breakfast. Your brain runs almost entirely on glucose for fuel, but it needs a steady supply, not a flood followed by a crash. When you eat a breakfast that is mostly refined carbohydrates, think white toast, sugary cereal, a donut, a large glass of juice, your blood sugar spikes quickly. Your body responds by releasing insulin to bring it back down. In a lot of older adults, especially those with any degree of insulin resistance, that response overshoots, and blood sugar drops lower than it should. That crash is what produces the classic late-morning brain fog, the trouble concentrating, the sense that your thoughts are moving through fog. Here's my honest opinion after looking into this for years. I think the traditional senior breakfast of toast, juice, and cereal is one of the most underrated causes of daytime memory complaints in people over 60. It is not dramatic. Nobody blames breakfast, but the pattern is there in study after study. The fix is not complicated, and it is not about deprivation. It is about pairing. Protein and healthy fat slow down how quickly sugar enters your bloodstream, which means a steadier fuel supply to your brain for hours instead of a spike and crash. Eggs instead of cereal. A handful of nuts alongside fruit instead of fruit alone. Greek yogurt instead of a sweetened breakfast bar. Small swaps, real difference. Let me give you a real comparison so this feels concrete rather than abstract. A bowl of sugary cereal with skim milk and a glass of orange juice will typically raise blood sugar quickly, produce a crash within 2 to 3 hours, and leave a person reaching for coffee or a snack to push through the resulting fog. 2 eggs with a slice of whole grain toast and half an avocado raises blood sugar far more gradually, and most people report steady energy and clearer thinking well past the 11 o'clock mark. Same amount of time spent eating breakfast. Completely different experience for the rest of the morning. I bring this up because I think breakfast is one of those habits people never question because it has always looked the same, and questioning it is often where the biggest improvement hides. The silent memory killer, called dehydration. I want you to try something after this video. Notice how much water you actually drink today, not how much you think you drink. Your brain is roughly 75% water. Even mild dehydration, as little as 1 to 2% of your body's fluid, has been shown to affect concentration, short-term memory, and mood. Now here's the part that makes this especially important for anyone over 60. Your sense of thirst becomes less reliable with age. The signal that used to reliably tell you, drink something, gets quieter, which means a lot of seniors are walking around mildly dehydrated for hours without ever feeling thirsty enough to notice. I think this is genuinely one of the easiest wins on this entire list. You don't need to force down 8 glasses of water on a schedule like a chore. A simple habit that works well is this: 1 full glass of water immediately after you wake up, before coffee, before anything else. That single habit alone rehydrates a body that just spent 7 or 8 hours with no fluid intake, and a lot of people notice their morning fog lifts faster once they add it. There is also a very simple test I like to suggest, and you can do this today without buying anything. Look at the color of your urine in the late morning. If it is consistently dark yellow rather than pale straw-colored, that is your body telling you plainly that you are behind on fluids. It is not a perfect medical test, but it is a free and instant signal, and I would rather someone check that once a day than guess. One more note here specifically for anyone taking a diuretic for blood pressure, which is extremely common after 60. Those medications increase fluid loss, which means your hydration needs are genuinely higher than someone not taking that medication, even though nobody usually mentions that when the prescription is handed over. Movement is not just for your body. Here's a fact that surprised me the first time I read the research. Physical exercise is one of the most powerful memory tools we know of, and it has almost nothing to do with your muscles. When you move your body, especially at a pace that raises your heart rate even a little, your brain releases a protein called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF for short. Think of BDNF as fertilizer for your brain cells. It helps existing brain cells survive longer and helps new connections form between them, particularly in a region called the hippocampus, which is the part of your brain most responsible for forming new memories. Now, I know what some of you are thinking watching this. Anderson, I'm 72, I have knee problems, I'm not running marathons. You don't need to. The research on this is actually very forgiving. A brisk 20 to 30-minute walk, 5 days a week, produces measurable improvements in memory performance in older adults. Not jogging, walking. If you have joint limitations, water aerobics, or a stationary bike gives you the same cardiovascular benefit without the impact. My honest thought here is that walking might be the single most underrated memory medicine available to anyone over 60, and it is completely free. I have talked to people who started a daily walk purely for their heart or their weight, and came back months later telling me, almost as an afterthought, I've also just been thinking more clearly. That is not a coincidence. That is BDNF doing exactly what it is supposed to do. Isolation is quietly dangerous for memory. This next one is uncomfortable to talk about, but I think it might be the most important chapter in this entire video. Loneliness is not just an emotional experience. It has a measurable physical effect on the brain. Multiple studies following older adults over years have found that those who report frequent loneliness show faster rates of cognitive decline than those with regular, meaningful social contact, even after accounting for other health factors. Conversation, real back-and-forth conversation, is actually a form of mental exercise. It requires you to listen, process, retrieve words, form responses, and read another person's tone and expression, all at the same time. That is a genuine cognitive workout, and it is one that people who live alone or who have lost a spouse often lose access to gradually without ever noticing the loss. I want to share something personal here. My own grandmother lived alone after my grandfather passed, and for the first year, her memory complaints increased noticeably. It was not dementia. When we eventually got her into a weekly card game with 3 other women in her building, something we should have arranged from the very beginning, her complaints dropped within a couple of months. Nothing about her biology changed. Her brain simply started getting used again in the way conversation and social engagement demand. If you are watching this and you live alone, I am not going to pretend that just call a friend solves loneliness, because it is more complicated than that for a lot of people. But I do want to leave you with one specific concrete idea. Pick one recurring social commitment this week, not a vague intention, an actual standing appointment, a phone call with a family member every Sunday at the same time, a weekly church group, a regular coffee with a neighbor. The word regular matters more than the word big. Consistency is what your brain benefits from, not intensity. What's actually on your plate. Let's talk about food a little more specifically, because there is a lot of noise out there, and I want to cut through it. There is no single miracle food that reverses memory decline. I want to say that clearly, because there is a lot of marketing out there suggesting otherwise. What the actual research supports is a pattern of eating, most closely studied in what is called the MIND diet, which combines elements of the Mediterranean diet with specific brain-focused adjustments. The foods that show up again and again in the research supporting brain health include leafy green vegetables, berries specifically, fatty fish like salmon and sardines a couple of times a week, olive oil as your primary fat, nuts, and beans. On the other side, the foods most consistently linked to faster cognitive decline are the ones most of us already suspect. Fried foods, heavily processed snack foods, red meat and butter in large regular quantities, pastries and sugary desserts eaten daily rather than occasionally. Here is my honest take on nutrition advice in general, because I think it gets presented in an unhelpful way most of the time. Nobody needs to overhaul their entire diet overnight at 70 years old. That approach fails almost every time because it is not sustainable. What actually works is one swap at a time. This month, add berries to breakfast a few times a week. Next month, work on getting fish onto the table twice a week instead of 0 times. Small, permanent changes beat dramatic, temporary ones every single time I have seen this play out. Stress and the cortisol problem. Chronic stress does something specific and measurable to memory, and I think this deserves its own chapter because it explains a pattern a lot of people notice but never connect to the real cause. When you are under stress, your body releases a hormone called cortisol. In short bursts, cortisol is helpful. It sharpens focus in a genuine emergency. The problem is chronic, ongoing stress, the kind that comes from worrying about finances, health, a difficult family situation, or grief that has not been processed. When cortisol stays elevated for weeks or months at a time, it has a direct, damaging effect on the hippocampus, the same memory-forming region we talked about earlier with exercise. Persistently, high cortisol has been shown in research to actually shrink hippocampal volume over time. This is why people often notice their memory getting noticeably worse during a stretch of major life stress, a health scare, the loss of a spouse, financial pressure, and then improving again once that specific stressor resolves. That pattern itself is actually a reassuring sign. It suggests the memory issue is tied to stress hormones rather than a structural problem. I think one of the most overlooked memory interventions available is something as simple as a daily 10-minute practice that calms the nervous system. This does not have to be formal meditation if that is not your style. It can be sitting quietly with a cup of coffee before the day starts, prayer if that is part of your life, or slow breathing for a few minutes before bed. The mechanism that matters here is lowering cortisol exposure over time, and the specific method you use to get there matters far less than doing it consistently. The mental exercise myth. I want to correct something here that I think a lot of memory advice gets wrong, including some well-meaning advice you have probably heard before. Crossword puzzles and Sudoku are often marketed as the gold standard for keeping your brain sharp. Here's the honest truth. If you have done crosswords for 20 years, your brain has gotten very efficient at crosswords specifically. That efficiency does not transfer much to your general memory or your ability to recall names and recent events. The research on this is fairly consistent. What actually challenges your brain and builds new cognitive reserve is novelty, not repetition of a familiar task. This means learning something genuinely new produces a bigger benefit than repeating something you are already good at. Learning a few phrases in a new language, learning to play a musical instrument for the first time, even badly. Taking up a hobby with actual rules and skill progression, like a new card game, painting, or woodworking. The struggle involved in learning something new is exactly the point. That struggle is what forces your brain to build new neural pathways instead of just running the same familiar ones. My honest suggestion here, and I say this to people in my own audience often, is to pick one thing you have always been mildly curious about but never tried, and give yourself permission to be bad at it for a while. That discomfort of being a beginner again is doing more for your memory than another decade of the same crossword puzzle ever will. Check your medicine cabinet. This next part is one people almost never think to check, and I think every person over 60 watching this should pause and actually look at their medication list after this video. A surprising number of very common medications list memory problems, confusion, or brain fog as a known side effect, and because these medications are so common, people rarely connect the dots. Certain antihistamines used for allergies or sleep, especially the older diphenhydramine-based ones, have anticholinergic effects that specifically interfere with memory formation. Some medications for overactive bladder work through the same mechanism. Certain sleep aids, some blood pressure medications, and some anxiety medications carry similar effects, particularly when combined with each other. I am not telling anyone to stop a medication. Please do not do that based on a video. What I am telling you is this. If your memory concerns started or worsened around the same time you began a new medication, or if you take several medications together, bring your full list, every single pill and supplement, to your doctor or pharmacist and ask directly, could any combination of these be affecting my memory or my thinking? Pharmacists, in particular, are an underused resource here. Many will sit down and review a full medication list for interactions at no charge, and this single conversation has resolved memory complaints for people I have spoken with faster than any lifestyle change could have. Putting it together, your 1-week memory reset. I promised you a real plan, not just information, so here it is. This is what I would call a 1-week memory reset. And I want you to notice that nothing on this list requires a doctor's visit, a prescription, or $1 spent, although a doctor's visit is never a bad idea alongside this. Day 1, start tracking your sleep honestly, not with an app necessarily, just a notebook by your bed. What time did you actually fall asleep, and how many times did you wake up? Day 2, swap your breakfast. Add protein to whatever you normally eat. An egg alongside your toast instead of toast alone. Day 3, add the first thing in the morning glass of water before anything else touches your lips. Day 4, take a 20-minute walk, even if it is broken into 2 10-minute walks around your home or building. Day 5, make one specific, standing social commitment for the coming weeks. Pick up the phone and lock it in today. Day 6, pick one new skill or hobby you have been curious about and take the very first small step. Watch one lesson. Buy one small supply. Just begin. Day 7. Sit down with your full medication and supplement list and write down any that started around the time your memory concerns began, ready to bring to your pharmacist or doctor. None of these 7 things are complicated. None of them are expensive, but together they address sleep, blood sugar, hydration, blood flow, social engagement, cognitive novelty, and medication side effects, which are genuinely the 7 most common and most fixable contributors to what people call bad memory after 60. Closing thoughts. Here is what I want you to walk away with today. A weak memory in your 60s, 70s, or 80s is very rarely a sign that something is permanently wrong with you. Far more often, it is your brain honestly reporting back on the conditions you have been giving it. Poor sleep, blood sugar swings, dehydration, too little movement, too little social connection, too much unmanaged stress, and sometimes a medicine cabinet quietly working against you. Fix the conditions, and in most cases, the memory follows. If today's video helped even one thing click into place for you, that is exactly why this channel exists. Anderson Coco Aging Consultant is built for people who want real, honest, practical information about aging well, without fear tactics and without gimmicks. If you found value here, please subscribe and share this with someone you know who has been worrying quietly about their own memory. And if you have your own memory tip that has genuinely worked for you, something that helped you personally, leave it in the comments below. I read every single one. And honestly, some of the best advice on this channel has come directly from people like you. Take care of that mind of yours. It has carried you through a whole lifetime already, and with the right care, it has a lot more good years left in it. I'll see you in the next video.